Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to Afternoons on the Dove. And today I am really delighted to have a very special guest with us, and he's via Skype from his home in Atlanta, Georgia. We have with us today New York's best-selling author Cecil Murphey with us today. He's the author and the co-author of more than 100 books, including the New York Times best-selling 90 Minutes in Heaven. And perhaps you've read that book. Of course, that is with Don Piper. And he's authored so many books, and his writings are so prolific. And today we're going to talk about, well, several of the books that he has authored and a new one that's coming out. And I think that you're going to want to listen very carefully and maybe even join the conversation. We're going to welcome you to be a part of the conversation by dialing 776-5368. But today we're going to talk to him about a couple of books that he's authored. When Someone You Love Has Cancer. We're going to be talking to him about words of comfort for times of loss, and when someone you love no longer remembers. And I'm sure you can somewhat read between the lines what these books are about and how meaningful they are to so many of us who have experienced those seasons in life. And his newest book that is due to come out this January, Because You Care. This is going to be a spiritual encouragement for caregivers, and that book will be released coming up in January of 2012. See, what a delight to have you with us today. I'm so grateful that you were able to make time to be with us today.
Hey, I'm just grateful that you asked me to appear on your program.
Well, it's wonderful because you're live on the Dove TV and you're live on the Dove Radio at the same time. Plus, we'll be repeating it both on radio and television a little bit later on this afternoon. So you're getting some pretty good coverage. And by the way, before we get too far into this, people that want to learn more about you, do they go to themanbehindthewords.com? Is that your website?
Well, that's one. Or you can just Google my name, Cecil Murphey. Either one will get to me.
Okay. All right. I'm going to, excuse me, I want to talk to you about when someone you love has cancer. We've experienced it in our family. We've had losses because of this in our family, and it's a very sensitive topic. And you've experienced this as well. Tell us about it.
Well, first, there are about 200 kinds of cancers, so it's a big group of cancers. But yes, my wife had a radical mastectomy. To make it worse, she came from a family where cancer was prolific. As she once jokingly said, in our family we grow things. Except for her mother, every relative in the last 2 generations has died of cancer. So it was prevalent, and we took care of her elderly sister for several years, who also died of cancer.
Wow. You said right at the beginning of the book you felt helpless. That's an incredible statement. Can you fill in the blanks for us?
Well, sure, because, I'm a guy, and we sort of take care of things, we fix things, we set things in order. Women do that too, but a little differently. And when there's a problem, we're fixers. And what do you do when there's nothing you can change? I absolutely felt utterly helpless, helpless, because there was nothing I could do to make her feel better or to take away her disease.
But you also said the one thing that you've learned during this time, even though you felt helpless, was that God was with you through this time of uncertainty and pain.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to remember. I don't think everybody feels that way, but we had that's just who we are, and we were really confident of God's presence with us, and that went a long way, especially for me.
All right, now when you hear the word cancer, it just conjures up all kinds of emotions, and we really struggle with it, and especially when it's applied to someone you love. What are some of those emotions? I mean, what are some of our reactions? Because I think what happens so often is we react the wrong way.
Well, of course, it's a frightening word. It's not perhaps as frightening today as it was, say, 10, 15 years ago, but the questions come up. Why me? Did I do something wrong? Did I fail God? Should I have done something different? You know, all those kinds of questions. They tend to go in terms of self-blame. If I had lived a better life, is God punishing me? All those awful kinds of things, especially when you hear that the cancer has metastasized or spread, then it's even more serious. So I think there are all those frightening kinds of questions, not knowing what's going to happen.
All right, so what are some of the mistakes we make for those who have a loved one that's been diagnosed with cancer? We obviously want to comfort them, but sometimes we bumble this pretty bad.
Well, we give them false assurances. We try to say words that we think are comforting to them. And so often we're dealing out of our own uncertainty, our own fear, our own worries. And instead of focusing on the person with cancer, we tend to focus on our discomfort, even though we may not be aware of it.
Now, I don't know, when you went with this through this experience with your wife, did she express to you what she was feeling and what she thought when she heard the word cancer?
Well, yes. I was afraid to talk. I have to be honest with you. I was afraid to talk about it at first. It was just so overpowering to me. You know, we experienced cancer in the family before. I've been a pastor for a number of years, a hospital chaplain, you know, but it just became personal. My wife handled it actually much better than I did. And though I talked about it, I really didn't get too personally involved until just a couple of days before the surgery. I finally said to her, you know, I don't know how to deal with this. And so we sat down and I said, look, the only way I know to deal with this, let's look at this. Let's think of every possible response or result of this. What happens if you go in for the surgery and they say, oh, it was a mistake, just a shadow on the x-ray or something, no cancer, all the way to you have 2 weeks to live. And, you know, that was hard for me to do that, but I felt I had to face the seriousness of this and emotionally handle it. And so we did that. I cried a lot. We prayed. She prayed. But surely my wife she handled this so well. And the thing that I thought was so wonderful with her is she kept saying to me, I'm okay. If this is God's time to take me, I'm okay. Well, I wasn't okay. It took me several minutes before I finally could say, okay, God, she's yours. Well, fortunately, she did recover. She's now in her 11th year of recovery. But, you know, this was the first time I ever really faced cancer with someone that close to me.
Why, why, of all the things that we possibly could contract, why do we shy away from talking about cancer? Why do we just don't go there?
Well, I think because we have made it, in ads and programs and books and so on, have made it that terrible disease. Probably the other thing worse would be AIDS, and most Christians aren't afflicted with that. Mm-hmm. So, but cancer, I think, is probably the worst, and it's an insidious thing. It's a growth that we can't stop or control, except perhaps by surgery or chemotherapy, radiation, but it's like something powerful outside ourselves that's come in and just sort of invaded our bodies. And that can be very, very frightening. Some people can't even say the word.
Well, for the most part, cancer is directly related to a negative outcome, and I guess we just don't want to go there.
Well, sure, and you know, it's like this. When I start talking about cancer, even if they say probably, not malignant or benign, you know, there's still that fear of what if it isn't. I think we've so long associated cancer with death, it's very, very difficult not to separate those emotionally.
Well, speaking of emotions, I'm just going to throw some out, and you can tell me how you managed them. Fear, anxiety, maybe you got angry because it happened to your wife, helplessness. I mean, that's a whole bag full of really extreme emotions.
You know, I will not tell you honestly, I was never angry at any point. I guess because I've been a Christian long enough that I think both of us were able to say, God, she is in your hands. She's always been there anyway. But to really acknowledge that, I wasn't angry. And I have to, but I will tell you this, I was thinking more about me than I was about Shirley, in the sense that I was thinking about, what will I do if God takes her? And that was really the anxiety of that. That probably more than anything else controlled my thoughts which is why I really had to talk about it.
Wow. When did you get over that? I mean, when did you realize you were thinking more about yourself and then her?
Well, I told you we had this time of just talking and praying together. It was the day before that I became aware of those feelings that I was really focusing on me and my inability to accept what was going on.
What are some of the mistakes that, and I'll come to the caregiver in a minute, which obviously you're very active in that role as well. But what are some of the mistakes that people make? Because so often when we hear a friend or a loved one's been diagnosed with cancer, to me, one of the greatest mistakes that happens is we turn around and we talk about somebody else or some situation else. And I'm thinking, man, that's the cruelest thing you can do. But it happens all the time.
Oh, and not only tell about another situation, they tell about the worst form of that situation. I had a friend who had the same thing and where she died. I'm not sure why they say it that way. I'm sure they're quite unaware, but they talk about the worst possible case. We always hear these people constantly coming around to us, telling us about, oh, when I had that, or my sister, or somebody else had that, and they always tell us how bad it is. And I think maybe that's part of their way of trying not to face the reality. I'm not sure why it is. I just think it's not very wise to talk that way, or very loving.
To me, it's one of the most. I have been paying more and more attention to it for various reasons, but I am surprised at how often we will bring in another story, which to me is a violation of the person who's going through the challenge themselves. What about feeling God in the middle? I mean, did you ever sense that maybe God was just quiet and he wasn't talking to you through this?
Well, yes, in a way I did. There are no answers of why this happened, and I will tell you very candidly, neither of us asked the why question. Here's the way I feel about it. If I ask why, suppose God gave me an answer. Suppose God said to me, okay, see, here are 3 reasons, 5 reasons, 10 reasons why your wife has cancer. I hear them. You know what? That doesn't make me feel any better. I now know reasons, but she's still the same. So that's not really the issue. The issue really for those of us who love someone with cancer is we think about our loss. That person is no longer going to be in our life, or will be in a lesser capacity sometimes. Sometimes there is full recovery, but not always. And those are the kinds of things we worry about.
I'm going to take a break here in a minute, and before I do, I'll ask you a question. You can think about it when we come back. But so often associated with cancer and surgery is some of the follow-up of radiation, chemotherapy, and all these other things. You lose your hair, you gain weight, you retain water, whatever. I mean, all of a sudden, you don't look the same, and I got to imagine that also adds to the pain as well. So we'll get into that in just a moment. We are delighted to have with us today Cecil Murphey. Perhaps you have read some of his books. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and he's authored 3 books. When Someone You Love Has Cancer, When Someone You Love No Longer Remembers. We have a couple of these books we'll be giving away at the end of the program as well. And if you want to join us, the phone number is 776-5368. We'll be right back.
Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove. Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
We're delighted today to have with us Cecil Murphey. He is, perhaps you've read a lot of his books, New York Times bestselling author. And today we're talking about a series of books that he's authored. When Someone You Love Has Cancer. We're talking about that right now. When Someone You Love No Longer Remember. And then Words of Comfort for Times of Loss. And then his new book, which will be coming out in the first part of the year, Because You Care. It's a spiritual encouragement for caregivers. Cecil Murphey. So you just may want to Google his name, Cecil Murphey, and you can check all that out. And then be listening towards the end of the program. We have some of these books to give away as well. And if you want to join us, we welcome you to do that. 776-5368. See, before we went into the break, we talked about, I don't know, did your wife ever feel ugly as a result of what was going on?
Absolutely. And I think with women particularly, almost all of them lose their hair, and probably of all the things that can happen to them, the loss of hair seems to be the worst. I remember my wife was in the shower, and the first day about half her hair came out. I mean, the second day she was totally bald. And, that really concerned me because I was aware of that this would probably happen. I'd also known women who'd lost their hair and how damaging it was to their self-esteem. So in our case, I said to her, you know what? Why don't I just shave my head? And we'll be two old baldies till your hair grows back. And she thought about it for a while, and she said, you've got curly hair, and I do. And she said, you've never let it really grow out. And I said, yeah, because I like it short. She said, how about letting it grow and let me look at it so that I can appreciate your hair. And I will tell you when to get it cut. I had it cut a week ago, so it's still very short. But that's what I do. And for the 11 years since she had cancer, I let my hair grow so it gets nice and curly in the back, and she can look at it. And then one day she'll come to me and she'll say, okay, you can get a haircut now. And, it was my gift to her. But also, it was my way of saying to her, I'm with you in this. I would have shaved my head for her.
Yeah. Wow. What do we do? I mean, you talk about smell the flowers. I mean, I'm creating an environment where they can enjoy life, because if you don't do something here, we both, I guess you and your wife, could internalize and then shut down. And so what do you mean by smell the flowers?
Well, I think it can be just as simple as things like just remind her or him of their importance, speak to them, do whatever you can to make life more meaningful to them. I think this is a time in life when it's so significant for us to say things that we haven't said before. I used to have a friend who's now dead, who used to say, give them flowers while they could still smell them. And she made a point when she heard someone was ill or having problems, she would send them to actually send them flowers or write them a letter, do something of a positive nature to say to them, you know what, you're important and I like you and I want you to know that.
Did your wife get tired of people asking the question, how do you feel?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, sometimes when people were coming, I would say to, please don't ask her how she feels. What I was trying to teach them to do was to say, do you feel like talking about it? There's a difference there. When someone says, how do you feel? Your answer is, I feel fine, I feel worse, I feel better. That you're pretty limited, and none of them are really the right answer. I think it's a better question to say, do you feel like talking? And then if they say yes, then let them tell you how they feel. I think we've gotten this kind of routine where we think we have to say certain things to be correct.
Do we stay too long, we visitors, when we come? Do we stay too long and just hang when we should just pop in and pop out?
Absolutely. One of the biggest problems we have visitors was they would stay and then would apologize for having to leave and have to make up excuses. When I had the chance, I didn't always get the opportunity, but when I could and they were coming, I'd say, it would really help if you don't stay very long. 10 minutes is plenty. And, I think they appreciated knowing that. Because what they often don't get is that when Shirley would be in bed or in pain, she was ministering to them. She was using her energy for them to encourage them. We don't usually think that way, but that's the reason I think many people are exhausted when their visitors leave, especially when they have a day with 10 visitors.
So often, we, in our attempt to be comforting, we start giving advice. we play doctor. How bad is that?
Oh, I think that's the worst. You start telling what they can do, shouldn't do. That's why they have doctors. They also have something called common sense. What you do, if you really want to help these people, I think there are a couple of things you can do. One is just to simply say, I care, but I don't know what to say. That's honest. The other thing you can do is say, look, you're going to need some help when you get home. Here's what I would like to do. Don't say, what can I do for you? That's an innocuous question. It really means nothing, and we get that all the time. But if you say, look, when you get home, how about if I bring a meal over and start doing your laundry or scrubbing the floors or something like that? See, that's practical. That's sincere. Those are the kinds of things that people need to offer. Now, if they don't want to do those things, don't offer them. But don't say, if you need anything, just call, because you know what? They won't.
Okay. Now, let's talk about, you are obviously the main, were you the main caregiver of your wife during this time?
Absolutely.
Okay. So how do you want your friends and family to help you so that they're not interfering with what you're trying to do?
You know what? That's a really good question. Now, I'm a writer, and I write full-time. And let me explain to you, when I say I write full-time, I work very hard. You mentioned I've done more than 100 books. I work 8 to 10 hours a day. That's just who I am. I have a lot of energy. And I didn't expect to write that kind of schedule after Shirley had cancer, but it did mean a lot to me that my two daughters, they both came by, took her out when she could go out, or even better, they did the shopping for us. I hate to go shopping for groceries. I can follow a list, but it's not very enjoyable. So little things like that. My second daughter, swept our floors, and I did dishes, things like that. But just those little, simple, practical things can mean so much.
What about so often when we come into the room, and I don't know how it was with your wife, but we come in and somebody's there, they're in pain, they're obviously not feeling well. We want to touch them. Maybe we want to hug them. I mean, that's one expression. Then there's the other expression of maybe laying on hands for prayer or something like that. How did you experience that, and how does that play out in the caregiving?
The best way I know to say this is to ask. Sometimes they don't feel like being touched, but you'd be amazed at how many times they would like to be touched. The problem generally is not that people want to touch you. The problem is they don't want to touch you. I think we're built for human touch. But if there's any question about it, say, may I touch you, or may I hug you? Do you feel like being hugged? Because they may not. Or is it all right if I pray for you? May I lay hands on you? That's always the easiest way. If you're not sure, just ask.
That's wonderful. I do want to get into the other book before we run out of time, but is there anything else you want to, that I didn't cover, that you want to highlight in this book when someone you love has cancer?
Yes, I'm a Christian. I read my Bible every day. What I found was the most unhelpful thing. People came and started quoting scriptures to us. And it's not that I don't believe in the scriptures. We do, and I think there's a place for them. And we know that God is with us. And I felt that those people who quoted scripture most of the time, not always, but most of the time, this was kind of their standard way to express their discomfort. If they had something positive that would really ring true, came from their heart, that was fine. But these sort of mouth verses in the Bible, I didn't feel those were very helpful. And I like reading the Word of God. And many of the days while Shirley was very ill, I would sit there and read the Bible to her. So it wasn't that we were strangers to God's Word, but it was that laying on this Bible, and it really didn't have a lot of meaning.
No.
Does that make sense? I'm saying it.
Yeah, how well I understand that. Okay, the name of the book is When Someone You Love Has Cancer, Comfort and Encouragement for Caregivers and Loved Ones by Cecil Murphey. And be listening in a few moments. We're going to be giving one of these away. Cecil, I want to transition over to the one about loving when someone you love no longer remembers. And I don't know of anybody that hasn't or isn't experiencing this in one shape or another. As we watch our parents and loved ones get older and things get a little bit more distant, boy, this can be frustrating. And what's your experience with this topic?
Well, I was a pastor for 14 years, and I was a volunteer hospital chaplain for about 10 years, so I saw it there. My mother was really entering a phase of dementia. And by the way, dementia is a kind of a cover-all term, of which Alzheimer's is one kind, but they all have to do with memory impairment, or it's the old word for senility is what it really is. Mm-hmm. And my mother was getting there, and I saw it several times in members of our congregation. I think the worst thing is this: their bodies still look the same. They look healthy, except for the eyes. The eyes start going dead, but except for the eyes, they look marvelously healthy. And to look at a loved one, watch a loved one slowly moving away from life is so hard. And I think one of the problems that many people face is they keep thinking, if I could just shake her out of this, which of course they can't, but keep thinking there's something I can do. Well, there isn't anything we can do when dementia sets in. You just have to accept it and learn to live with it.
Well, why do we deny it? Why do we deny some of the beginning signs of it?
Well, I don't know altogether. Let me tell you, I think one of the big things that keep coming back to this is that it might happen to me, and that's very fearful. You know, when I was a pastor and did a lot of funerals, one of the things that I realized every time I did a funeral, somehow I connected with my own death. One day, someone would be up there saying this about me. And it made me quite uncomfortable for a long, long time. And I think this is true with any of these forms of dementia. When you see these people wearing away, their mind going, but the body staying healthy, this can be terribly frightening. And I tell you, it's, for me, because I work with my mind as a writer, mm-hmm. I think of anything I would rather not have is some form of dementia.
All right, let me take another break. We'll be right back. Cecil Murphey's with us, and New York Times bestselling author. And today we're talking about several of his books, but right now, When Someone You Love No Longer Remembers. It's a powerful topic. Maybe you have some questions about it. And we have one of these books to give away, so we'll be right back.
Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove. Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
Well, we're delighted today to have with us Cecil Murphey. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and he's authored numerous books, over 120. He's on a series of books that we're talking about today. When Someone You Love No Longer Remember, When Someone You Love Has Cancer, Words of Comfort for Times of Loss. We have a series of these books we'll be giving away here in a few minutes at the end of the program. And then be looking out for his new book coming out, Because You Care, Spiritual Encouragement for Caregivers. And that'll be coming out shortly. Cecil today is with us via Skype from his home in Atlanta. Cecil, on the subject, when someone you love no longer remembers, I think one of the most difficult things for me to manage, and believe me, I've experienced this in my life, of all things, this seems to be so undeserving. When somebody has been such a vibrant person, then all of a sudden they just slowly slip away and you can't have a rational discussion with them. It's just hard to process that in your brain.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the things we think about. He doesn't deserve this or she doesn't deserve it. That's who deserves it. Yeah. Either nobody deserves it or everybody deserves it, because we are basically sinners. And, there's no way to know who's going to get it or who won't. And I think part of life is to accept the unexpected.
Well, you know, our late President Ronald Reagan was diagnosed, and then he seemed to manage it so well because he actually wrote about it and wrote a goodbye to the United States that he was going to go into this season of his life. And I thought that was incredibly remarkable to have that much cognitive thought at the beginning of this stage to recognize it as to where it would lead.
Well, and I think there are many people who do. But that talks about the courage, and I think that's exactly your point, is that not everybody can face it. I think the tendency is when you first begin to realize something is wrong is to deny it or find reasons why it's not true. Or, I'm just getting old, I'm getting forgetful. Listen, hey, what else do you expect when you're 65 or 90 or whatever? And I think we tend to react that way rather than saying, you know what? I am going downhill mentally. That's a powerful thing. It takes a lot of courage to say that.
Yeah, no question about it. Why? Well, what do we say to somebody that we know that they're slipping? They may not recognize they're slipping. So what do we say when we know that we're not going to get a rational response? I mean, how do we talk to these people so that they can somehow feel our love for them?
Well, by the way, I want to tell you, in all of these caregiving books I've written, I have a series of appendices where I give them some practical things to remember. But the main thing is to keep the language simple and talk to them in very straightforward sentences. Look them in the eye. Here's the one thing I would say. I always say, look the person in the eye. Let him or her know you're really talking directly to them. And don't talk to whoever else is in the room about them. Talk directly to them in simple sentences. And if you don't get rational answers, just keep going.
How important is touch in this situation?
Oh, I think touch is incredibly important. Just to touch the hand. There's something about us that we're built to be, it's called skin hunger, I guess, where we really need the human touch. And one of the problems with people who have diseases such as Alzheimer's or any form of dementia is the tendency for people to back away from them and not to touch them. Yeah, years ago when I was a pastor, and I used to go to a nursing home, and I would see these poor people sitting in the hallway in their wheelchairs and reaching out. And at first it bothered me. Then I realized they just needed a little human touch. So I made it a point to touch. Sometimes I'd touch a cheek or a hand, something, and smile, and they relaxed. And I think it's that need to feel connected to another human being.
All right, you mentioned earlier how important it is that we don't talk about that person with other people while that person's in the room. Boy, and I see that all the time.
Oh, of course, because see, that person it's like a child. You're standing there with your parents, and the tendency is not to talk directly to the child, but talk about the child to the parents, or that kind of a thing goes on with people with any form of dementia. And if you come to see the person, talk directly to them. Make them aware that you're there. They may or may not recognize you. The thing you have to remind yourselves of Alzheimer's or any form of dementia is that there are no two cases alike. Some people go through the whole thing in a matter of a couple of years. And I've known a few people with dementia that have gone for 10, 12, 14 years. But the main thing is communicate to them. Whether they really understand isn't really the issue. The point is, you are giving yourself to that person.
All right. You say in your book to caregivers, expect the unexpected. What do you mean by that?
Well, you never know what they're going to do or how they're going to respond. So, sometimes they have moments of rationality, and that's fine. I remember one woman hadn't recognized anybody for days, and her husband took her to a funeral, and her friend Betty came up to her that she hadn't seen in probably 7 or 8 years, and Betty reached out her hand, she looked at her, she said, Betty, and light came into her eyes. That was one of those great moments. But the other thing with is unexpected is that sometimes their behavior becomes irrational, or they may accuse you of being somebody taking from them, stealing from them. They may do anything bizarre. So if you're prepared to realize this person is not who she or he normally was, so don't be upset at any form of behavior.
Okay. At what point do we? At what point would we be agitating the situation if we talk too much or stay too long?
Well, those are two good things to think about. Is staying too long, talking too much. I think if we watch the person, if they begin to get agitated, you just simply say, "It's time for me to leave." You don't have to give an excuse. A little simple statement like that, "It's time for me to leave," and leave. Don't prolong it or take forever to get out. Just get out of there, and because you never know how their moods are going to be. There's something that's called sundowning. We don't know why this happens, but often in late afternoons, about sundown, they tend to get quite agitated, and so. One thing I would say to people is don't visit in the late afternoons. If you're going to visit just before or just after lunch, when most of them are usually in a pretty good state.
Is anger, have you experienced anger somewhat to be accelerated during this time with people who are suffering with dementia?
A little, but not as much as you might expect. Part of it is I don't think they know how to express a lot of those emotions. Think of it this way: as they begin to lose their memory, a portion of their brain, they lose the most kinds of emotions. The anger comes from some awareness that they are not who they were before. I think that's where the anger comes primarily from, not anger over the disease.
What can you say to a spouse whose loved one is now moving into this season where there's just slowly fading away from them emotionally and cognitively? How can you prepare the spouse of that person?
That's a great question, honestly. Several things. One, get educated. Find out everything you can about the disease. Talk to your doctor. Go online. It's amazing how much information there is. And take care of yourself. Get some kind of support group. There are Alzheimer's support groups, dementia support groups in churches and civic organizations. Get help for yourself. And one of the hardest things to do is to ask people, help me. And one other thing is, don't be ashamed. This is one of the things that I noticed with a lot of people, especially in the early stages. They're ashamed. They want to deny that the other person has dementia of some kind. This is a reality they're going to have to face. The sooner you can accept it and say to your friends, your loved ones, please help me. One of the things that I encourage people to do is, if they've been members of a Sunday school class, for instance, continue to take the person to Sunday school. That's a familiar place to them. But most of all, if you're a caregiver, find ways to help yourself. Get somebody to come in and let you go shopping, or if you're a woman, get a facial, or whatever you need to do, something so that you get away from that situation for a period of time. Because one of the things with people with dementia, they are a 24-hour-a-day caregiving situation.
All right. We don't have a whole lot of time, but I do want to just briefly, maybe you could highlight it. I'll just throw it back to you, C, on the words of comfort for times of loss. I mean, so often we say the wrong things at the point of death. What can I do for you? Anything I can do for you? I realize those are well-meaning and well-intended, but they're usually the wrong things to say. Can you capsulize this for us in about a minute?
Yeah, the best thing I would say is, if you really want to talk to them and find comfort, what I found the most helpful is to say, one of the things I really loved about Rob, and tell some story about we had a great time of communication. Those are the things that bring comfort, and don't give them false words that just they're easy, convenient. Or I always say this: if you don't know what to say, just simply say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here and I care. Or sometimes a hug is enough. We feel that we've got to fix it or correct the situation. There's nothing we can do to change it, but we can somehow find ways to express that we care.
So often as Christians, we'll say, well, they're in heaven, they're better off. And that doesn't leave you much comfort. I mean, that almost is the cruelest thing you could say.
Well, it really is as though, or the worst was when a child died and say, well, God needed another cherub in his choir. How awful. What you simply say is something like, I'll bet you miss him a lot. That's an honest feeling, and that puts the emphasis back on the person's loss so they can talk about it. Again, you could say, do you feel like talking about it? And here's the other thing, is let them talk as much or as little as they want. Now, I'm an expressive person, you may gather. Yeah. So when I have suffered loss, I want to talk. I may tell you the story 10 times.
That's wonderful. Cecil, I got to step on you and let you go here, but thank you for being with us, and thank you for your work. You obviously live personally all of these books, and I want to say thank you so very much for being with us today, and I hope to have you back real soon. I'd love to interview you on the book on the 90 Minutes of Heaven sometime.
Okay.
We'll get you back. Thank you. Cecil Murphey with us today. Words of comfort for times of loss. When someone you love no longer remembers, and when someone you love has cancer. We have one of each of these books, and they'll go to the next 3 callers at 776-5368. Whether you're watching on TV or listening on the radio, 776-5368. You could win one of these books. Cecil Murphey with us today. Google his name. Check out all of his work. And again, thank you, Cecil, for being with us. And we'll see you tomorrow. God bless you all.